everyone. Welcome back to the AI Talk Show. I'm Asha Saxena. And today we're going to unpack a question I get from all the C suite. When I'm working with the C suite leader, they're usually asking me, how do we actually build the systems around AI that can actually stick around, that can make it stick for their stakeholder, their audience? But the truth is, AI is not on its own, it doesn't scale on its own. It really needs people, process, platform, governance, a whole ecosystem. As we've seen it firsthand, organizations launch AI in their pilots, but 6 months later, the model are shelved. The teams are moving on, and there's no measurable impact. And when I go to conferences, I hear this over and over and over again. Is this the failure of the AI system, or is it the failure of the ecosystem? And I truly want to bring that to our conversation today because the truth is, if we want to build reliant, real AI solutions, we need to focus on the ecosystem we are building. It's not about just experimenting, but thinking about how do we operate, scale, and deliver value. And today, I'm so excited to have Victoria join us because, Victoria, you've actually led organization into digital transformation as a global head at Boehringer Ingelheim. You've led strategy, execution of AI, digital innovation. I'm really excited about specifically talking to you about the topic today. We all are having conversation about technology so much, we kind of forget about talking about ecosystem, the people behind it, the system, the processes, and sometimes that becomes our biggest roadblock. So before we get started, I want to welcome you to the show, Victoria, and so happy that you're here to talk about such an important topic. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Asha. And I think you introduced that topic so well. It's a multifaceted problem. It's a combination of the business, the technology. We talk about people and processes. We talk about platforms, governance. Those are all of the exciting points that I think we should really hit on and tackle in the conversation today. And I'm sure they're questions that everyone has on their mind. So hopefully we give folks some nuggets to walk away from this with.
I enjoy this LinkedIn Live because I feel like I'm sitting with the people on LinkedIn community and we can actually have this conversation. So I'll encourage everyone who's listening, please engage, ask questions, and hopefully we'll be able to take your questions. But before we get started, Victoria, into the frameworks or the operating model, I want to spend a few minutes, just a little bit on your journey. Tell us a little bit about how your background have shaped the way you think about AI ecosystems today. What experiences, what background has truly influenced your approach in how you see this topic?
Absolutely. So many things and so many components to it. First of all, as a female in the data space, right, we've seen data, we've seen analytics. We then went into the data science world. Right now it's AI, but it's all really variations and building blocks of these components. I'm trained as a biostatistician. I have a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine in biostatistics. So I've always had this passion and love for combining numbers, but in a very applied kind of way. And in my role today, I'm really applying it to our business in the healthcare and life sciences ecosystem, but also looking at what little nuggets can I get from others? So when I mentor startups at NYU in their Endless Frontier Labs, I'm always looking at what other things people are doing and really connecting the dots, taking this idea of recombination of what is it that is being done in one place, how can we think about that problem in another? And that's really where I think also scalability and learning comes from. So in my background, I was trained really to think about the data integrity as a key foundational concept. With my biostatistics background, it really instills a rigor in data quality and validation and the ethical use. And all of that is really critical as you think about it now for trustworthy AI, for example. Biostatistics in and of itself is also a very cross-disciplinary field, and cross-disciplinary collaboration is exactly what, in my experience, the success of AI will really lean on. Having those individuals who are the bridge builders between the data creators and the data consumers will be key. And in my specific industry, the ability to work across clinical and regulatory, but also the technical domains, really enables us to have effective alignment of these AI initiatives. And maybe the third piece is really also then being outcomes driven, especially when it comes to innovation. We think about how we develop and design drugs. It's always about getting the right medicines to the right patients at the right time. And so that is really something that is measurable. It has real world impact. And in this way, you think about, going from one tool or one approach, such as a clinical trial or a clinical program to get the medicines to the right people, now applies also to AI solutions that are relevant and scalable and ethical in how they're developed to be utilized maybe by the internal organization, maybe by your key partners or stakeholders, maybe ultimately by a variety of others in your ecosystem. So that is some of the things that have really driven
Yeah.
a lot of what I've done.
I'm just amazed by your background, Victoria. You started your PhD in biostats and then moving into the digital transformation for enterprises. I mean, it's a huge transition, but I have to acknowledge that it's about lifelong learning, right? It's about
Yes.
evolving yourself with what the environment needs. And I think that's such an important piece to take away for the audience is that maybe you spend all your life in technology or all your life in business, but how do you bridge these gaps becomes really a critical skill in this day and age. We talk, people will ask me, oh, should I send my kid to, still, is it relevant for my kid to go and learn computer science because the technology is going to do the coding. And I always say it's not about so much about the technology, it's about how your mind processes problems. From your PhD of thinking about biostat as numbers and quality and data to really thinking about enterprise execution is such a great transition. And I think that's what I would want the audience to take away is that you could be in a business unit, but how you think about data and AI and use cases, the data creator and the data consumer you spoke about, the
Yes.
marriage of that is so critical.
Absolutely. And it's about learning how to learn. I think that's really, to me, a key tagline in what you were saying, learning how to learn and process information. My background and my thesis research was in the space of real world data, leveraging registries, right? Sort of observational data in order to be able to use it for future clinical research. And as I think about that, that is real world data by definition, therefore messy, therefore unclean. It was actually the perfect breeding ground to be able to step into digital transformation as we think about an enterprise and having to, in a large organization, but even medium and small organizations, bringing together different data. Some of it might be data you create within your organizational walls, others might be data assets you purchase in order to help with certain business decisions and aspects. None of it is probably in today's day and age exactly the same. So let's take a term like what is an active clinical trial? How one system maybe captures it, or one function captures it, or how another company captures it, and then you try to bring it all together. There are inherent challenges in doing that. And so having an understanding of how you bring data together, both from a technical business domain perspective, what does it make sense to come together
Right.
to make a fruit salad, right? And you are ultimately the chef here trying to build a delicious dish and menu for your customers. I often tell my team that we're also in the business of hospitality. We
Yeah.
might not see it exactly in that way, but we have to serve up that business value. And so the ability to have had the experience in my training of doing that programming, when I've taught at Columbia in the past, the ability to be able to explain what is a complex concept to students so that they can then take it into their career journeys, right, really helps to reinforce the ability to similarly talk to our board members about the tools that we're building, the solutions that we are putting forward. All of those experiences come together to build this web. And so I think for all of those in our LinkedIn community, there's a really big opportunity to also connect with people in and outside of your industry who are doing things that are in neighboring areas, because it really does cross pollinate how we look at these topics. And so welcome anyone also in our community to reach out to me. Happy to have these conversations, and variety of depths. But those are really some of the things that I think allow us to also bring that transparency and explainability to what we do and what might otherwise be seen as, right, at least historically, in a black box.
I have to tell you, when you were talking about Columbia, I teach at Columbia too, and you said, your background, your PhD is biostat, and you teach in the applied science, applied analytics
Analytics, yep.
analytics program. And I had a computer science engineering background, so I went to academia for that. And my PhD right now is in high performance computing and AI. And I teach at the public health school of public health at Columbia University, where I teach entrepreneurship and AI. So to think about the marriage, right? I come from tech background going into business. You come from a science background going into tech. And I think that is the beauty. When you evolve as a leader, you have to start learning multiple disciplines. And that makes easy for your consumer to digest. And so a lot of time users or the stakeholders are kind of questioning AI. They think AI is a magic box. You just open it and you're going to get the results. But in reality, it's really thinking about, what do we need to make that successful? Do we have the clear business problem to make sure we're addressing the right business problem? When I'm working with the AI Factor Institute and I'm teaching the methodology, the first thing I focus on is building the priorities. Like, do you have the right priorities, and are you using the right use case that gives you the highest value? So really thinking about, are we using this powerful friend of yours, the AI tool that's going to come in and create more productivity? Are you using it effectively and making sure that it's giving you the right power that you need for the right problem? Instead of just applying it everywhere, you want to make sure that you are thinking through it effectively. uh, a lot of leaders are hearing, like we're talking about the AI ecosystem, a lot of leaders are now hearing about the ecosystem today, and they're thinking it just means adding few more tools to the tech stack. But what we are really talking about, it ecosystem, is not about tech deployment, it's about the operating environment. So what I want to kind of focus on is, in health system, when you're looking at the architecture, the governance, and the culture, from your perspective, what does a strong ecosystem actually look like? What are the essential components, would you say? How do they come together to create a value across the enterprise? Because ultimately it is about the value.
Yeah. So I think the points you hit on are actually very much foundational. I would say maybe three things come to mind as a sort of rising to the top of the list in addition to what you shared. One is an element of like an end-to-end governance. What I mean by that is, of course, you have the governance of the data, but then there's also the governance of how do you govern your ecosystem in terms of AI. You can have an organization where you say, we listen for innovation throughout, right? And ideas can pop up anywhere, but then to be able to go from an idea to having the ability to take that idea and build a solution with it, something that really serves the need, there's an element of governance that is needed. So I would say that end-to-end governance across that life cycle and chain is important. The second piece that comes to mind is also thinking about what is your organizational AI lifecycle framework? What are um, routines and systematic approaches, guided development that you can lean into? Anything from data acquisition, right, the purchasing of data, through all the way to the deployment and ultimately the decommissioning of that. What are the checkpoints around validation or ethics? Does it have to be GXP? Does something actually not have to be? And how do you still demonstrate that it's trustworthy, that it's reliable in terms of making business insights or a variety of different business decisions that are necessary? And I think if you put those things together, right? Or maybe the last thing I would say, the third one that comes to mind is this integrated deployment piece, right? The ability of being able to not just hear for and listen for the problem, not just to govern how that comes into your ecosystem. Not all ideas need to be developed or are appropriate to be developed at that time. Then there's the AI life cycle concept. What frameworks, what do you use? But then there's the deployment of that. And how do you deploy something in an integrated way? We've talked with my team about, jobs to be done. Do we know the job to be done of a particular business? Right. And if you understand the job to be done, you understand the workflow. If you understand the workflow, you further, right, a layer deeper, understand the flow of the data, right? How does it get created? How does it get consumed? Back to the general and basic principles. And then you're able to say, okay, now I know what is to be done. I can say, do I need to do these 6 steps? If I do, right, then I may take step 4 and say, what is a particular AI solution here? But it may be the case that steps 2 to 4 are actually no longer the right steps when you think about how we can actually support that with technology today. And you may become more efficient by saying, I can do that piece with technology, have my human assess it. Think about the creation of, for example, documents. We talk a lot about through various consortia in pharma, the creation of regulatory documents. A
Right.
first version, because we have such a breadth of library of documents already created, could be created by a tool with
Right.
the right inputs and the right prompts. And then a person can take that and say, great first version. Now I add the human element. And this to me is what allows us to do something that is more evidence-based. Evidence being that combination of the knowledge I have as a human, the creativity I bring, the things that are not yet coded into a AI data set. And how do I, on top of that knowledge, bring in the data, those things that will exist no matter if it is my opinion or not, that is truth, or, right, depending on how good your data is, and, right,
Right.
hopefully truth, and bring those two components together to make that evidence. But that to me, I think, is really something that would be an important starting point for leaders to think about in this day and age. What is it and how do we in our organization govern things? What is it that we know about how we implement ways of thinking around the AI lifecycle? And how do we make sure that the business benefits and have that integrated deployment?
You talked about architecture of this system or data, and making sure all the right elements come together. And I think when you talk about ethics, what a great time. The whole WLDA stands behind the mission to make sure there's parity and equity in the digital world. And even though we live in a world which is biased, we as engineers, as architect of these systems, can be more cautious of using the right framework to make sure there is no bias, or at least bias is reduced, or we can find the data will never be perfect. It never be 100% accurate. There'll be always issues, as because it's a living and breathing system. So as you get more data and you have the right system deployed, we as having humans in the loop can start curating and correcting the system and the data, identifying that there's not enough data, or identifying that there is bias in the data, or identifying the data needs more cleaning. Humans need to be constantly involved to make sure that we're designing and architecting our solution more effectively. I definitely want to bring this down to some ground level example. When you think about the concept, of course, there's so much theory about the AI space, but what's missing in real world or real talk about this is actually how does it really work? And, as we think about the ecosystem, and we're thinking about the models, and we're thinking about the governance and data pipeline, the main things that we all probably will agree is the change management, the stakeholder alignments. There are some real challenges in day-to-day world. I love to hear some of the use cases where you've seen full ecosystem built, where the pieces come together from data governance to deployment. And I'm sure always grass is greener on the other side. You think maybe somebody else is doing better. And in real life, there's a lot more challenges, but would still like to hear what you see makes an effort successful. Was there a particular framework or approach that helped you guide through the process?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Maybe before I dive into some of that, you mentioned the change management piece, and I
Yes.
think this is also something that uh, when I teach and as I also mentor and advise educational institutions on this, there's sort of two human concepts that we need to continue to lean into. One is making sure that we are aware of the context or the background. If we talk about an AI algorithm or any kind of algorithm, even right, a standard statistical model, right? We need to understand the data that is fed into these and understand the context around that. And one example that I give my students at Columbia is if you have a data set that has, let's say, information on customers, and emails is one of the columns of that data. If you are looking to create a segmentation, you don't necessarily need the emails column, right? You have enough information on their demographics and other features of that group to create, let's say, your top segments. If, however, you're looking to use that same data source to do a marketing campaign and you realize you only have 20% of the emails, you better make sure you understand what bias these are coming in of why
Yes.
you're missing 80% of that data. And so this is where the second real life human skill comes in, because for all of us, no matter how technical we are as leaders or how business savvy we are as leaders, wherever we fall along that spectrum, the critical thinking skill needs to be there. If you get an answer, you need to ask what certain key critical business questions around what was that model trained on? How was bias reduced? You may not even know all of the types of biases that could creep in, but certainly the colleagues and the teams that are working on that should be thinking about that. And if they're not, you should ask and they should take the time to really understand that. How do you know as a leader or as a decision maker, know that you can trust what comes out? Right. All of these questions, I think, are really critical questions. Now, in terms of certain real life examples, I think there are many opportunities to leverage a variety of data and analytics. I recently heard a Harvard professor talk about the life cycle of what is happening in the space of imaging within a hospital and an emergency room. The example that was given was patients who were experiencing a stroke. The traditional workflow or patient journey, right, is that there is an event, the event is identified. Patient then gets brought to a center. There's then a triage. There's some scans, images that are done to understand. Then a human needs to review that. Then the patient gets, depending on the outcome, sent to maybe a next test to further determine maybe the damage, the impact, et cetera. And then there's maybe 10 steps to get that patient the right treatment. In a situation in a healthcare setting where time is critical, the sooner you get to treatment, the sooner you can preserve the function and subsequent treatment, right, and rehabilitation of a patient and a person, right, the more critical it is. We should all be concerned about that. We, knock on wood, will never be in that situation, but we may
Right.
be. And so the example was that actually now what was being prioritized is that there was a machine ranking of the medical records and the images of those patients to be able to know which patient was most urgently in need of an inhuman decision to be made and reviewed to get them to that next step faster. And it
Mm,
took a very long process and was able to really reduce it in an incredible amount and impact to those patient and people outcomes that ultimately is what drives that whole ecosystem. And I think that's a great example of where
yeah.
what you're doing is trying to increase the and help the prioritization. Now, if you think about a business, when you think about asset allocation, when you think about a nonprofit or a community center that needs to figure out where and when to which programs do I allocate my physical locations or my other assets, you can imagine that you applied, right, and similar approaches applied. Where we have to be careful, though, is that depending on our knowledge or the knowledge of our counterparts in leadership of data and AI terms, not everyone shares the same understanding. So if you are in a situation where someone brings forward, right, depending on your governance, a really interesting, let's say, chatbot type LLM tool, you might say that's a great tool to answer this question, but that
Right.
LLM tool, for example, because everyone's talking about Gen AI right now,
Right.
may not be the best tool to create what should be done as a machine learning predictive model. And so there needs to also be this kind of critical thinking around what is also the right tool for the various different circumstances to be able to move forward.
Right. And you know what? It is about the right tool, having the right tool. As you spoke about having the right people, asking the right question. But when you think about where does this all fall apart, it's most organizations don't fail at AI because of the tech. They fail because their team aren't aligned or data is not ready, or they're treating AI like a project instead of thinking about AI as a platform. So what I see often is siloed functions or unclear ownership or brilliant models sitting like idle because no one built the downstream workflow becomes a challenge. So I think it's not one thing. It's all. That's why I love this topic, Victoria, when you said AI ecosystem is like, what is the ecosystem, and do we have the right music playing, or as you said, the chef cooking the right meal with the right ingredient becomes really important. I think as a leader, you are looking at the right ingredient, and so it's not one thing in a silo. It's also always bringing everything together is what the skill as a leader you need to have. And I love having this conversation because I feel like in Wilda, we have the diverse leaders who are having these conversations from different functional, different business, different backgrounds coming together and making sure that we are sharing and learning from each other. But I want to talk a little bit about as we look ahead. We know that this space is uh, accelerating at a very, very fast pace. Models are evolving, tools are changing every month, every week. But companies that succeed long term will only be the ones who build resilient ecosystem. It's not just a playbook for now, but the foundation that we're building for what's coming next. So, Victoria, I'm going to probably, my last question to you before we close would be for executives or innovators, entrepreneurs who are watching today on LinkedIn community, what practical steps, or in fact, maybe we should say mindset shift, would you recommend for starting to build an AI ecosystem today? Not just strategy, but actions that can be taken now to future proof the organization.
Yeah. So, I've also observed some of these same limitations and challenges that you mentioned, and I think having your eye and ear to those potential risks and thinking about how you mitigate those risks is absolutely important. But looking on the positive side of it, a few things come to mind. We're talking about an ecosystem. So I think applying really system thinking approaches are important. What do I mean by that? There is a balance when it comes to thinking about what the future with AI looks like. And in reality, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what future AI, cool, amazing, shiny objects will come. What I do know is that I need to be able to address business problems for today and tomorrow, while also building a foundation and a set of approaches that no matter what future AI comes, we will have the resiliency and the thinking to be able to tackle it. And so that's really what I mean by the system thinking approach. We must view that AI is part of a broader digital transformation, and it's not a standalone solution. The other, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. I like that, talking about, the system view instead of just the department or, people view.
Exactly. In our more technical words, we would say, right, balancing use case and data foundation building, or creating products that are scalable and sustainable, just like we would create data products. And so you're spot on that. And this is where I would say maybe my second recommendation would come in terms of leveraging knowledge from agile culture, software development, really thinking about data as an asset and the AI solutions or the analytical solutions that sit on top of it are really to be developed. It's hard almost nowadays to think about what is my ROI in 5 years. I don't know. The world is going to look totally different.
Right.
But what I can tell you is we can look a little bit ahead and have the flexibility and agility to adjust to the evolving needs. It's a bit more chaotic, it's a little bit less comfortable. Where that will fail and where it has to succeed is in the ethical use, right? Because that will be the biggest. Once you start to erode the trust, you really find that people are not going to utilize the solutions, no matter the intensity or severity of a decision. So, embedding that kind of principles of responsible AI, fostering communities and circles within your organization of continuous learning in these topics, because the world is evolving, will really build that organizational resilience from my perspective. And maybe the last, yeah,
No, I was just going to say, I think it's such an important point of responsibility of running responsible AI, because I think we're such a great place that we are. I always say we are making history because we are creating these systems, and I think every person who's listening, and if you're engaged in any kind of aspect of data or AI, you are creating history. So being responsible, really focusing on ethics and making sure that what we create is we are doing good. And so becoming, and I did the TEDx where I spoke about upgrading as a human. How do you upgrade yourself as a human in the age of AI becomes really critical. So I love that you touched upon that point on your second point, which I think is so very dear to my heart.
absolutely, exactly right. And so then the other piece, maybe sort of to put the bow on it and go back to the beginning of our conversation, we're not doing any of this alone. So one of
Yes.
the things that I've done is built a very diverse team, diverse in their backgrounds and parts of the business that they came from. That is around that cross-pollination and collaboration, but it also allows to build strategic partnerships and to ensure that when you are thinking about the governance of your ecosystem, that you have a variety variety of different perspectives because I would rather know the limitations of my tool as early as possible. I want it to be challenged as early as possible before it gets to the main stage, before it gets to the board, right? Before others really start seeing it and using it, because I want to know. And so we need to have that early on investment in governance, but also look at things as a collaboration. The biggest successes I've had have been when we've reached across and worked with our IT counterparts because we're in the business, they're in IT, but we are the bridge builders. We speak a bit of their language, we teach them about our language, and that is how you're able to take what is really a business need, a job to be done within the business, and translate it to requirements that then our colleagues can really help us build. When I first started in the space of data governance, we had an example where we were building a simpler way to find data, right? Following those FAIR principles, findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. And I was bringing a unique expertise and a unique type of data, that which is the patient level data. And the requirement to make sure that that data was utilized only for the specific purposes that were allowed for scientific research was not yet translated to our technical counterparts. So they didn't know what they didn't know. And so it's being able to understand and build that bridge that really allowed us to build our first successful tools that are utilized. And now we've seen it, where companies externally are building those tools, we're learning from each other. And so really a rising tide lifts all boats. And that is what I'm really excited about the space. This is really what we're seeing. So that systems thinking approach, embedding the ethical and agile concepts into our culture, that curiosity that has to come with, balanced with attention to detail, and really building things and solutions that are going to serve our needs, because AI can be very hard to grasp. It's not always very tangible. And yet the reality is we all live in a world today. We have, physical clothes, physical things that need to happen. And for patients and their caregivers, right, it's a very tangible, real life human experience. And so bringing together those strategic partnerships and that governance, I think, is the last piece that really sets us up and helps to future proof those AI ecosystems.
I love those tidbits and a happy story to end this episode on. Thank you so much for coming here on the show and also talking about such an important topic. I love the depth and clarity we had in this conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and really happy to connect with our community and exchange further ideas. I think that, you guys and Wilda have done such a great job to build this community. And so really appreciate being a part of it. Thank you.
I love that. And I have to say to the audience, everybody who's listening, that we have a community of CIOs, CTOs, CTOs, the tech community of senior leaders who are coming together at WILDA, World Leaders in Data and AI. But we also actually launched a CEO community of large business, mid-cap businesses, we say around 1,000 to 10,000 employee companies. And the beauty is that now we have the CEOs of mid-cap companies coming with the large enterprises, CIOs, CTOs, and have this conversation about really thinking about how to do the AI transformation. Today we spoke about the ecosystem, and there are many other conversations that we talk about on this show. But really, when we boil it down to AI, is not just the technology; it's the infrastructure challenge. Is it a people challenge? It's about the ecosystem. It's also a leadership challenge. I always say that if it's a technology or a business problem, it's how the leaders see it and how do they think about solving it. I love, Victoria, what you say about it's a it's a system challenge, it's a leadership challenge, and how we think about it. We talked about building an AI ecosystem. We are really talking about how to operationalize intelligence. Talking about operationalizing intelligence across people, platform, and decisions. To everyone who's watching, if your AI efforts are stalling, zoom out. Look at the environment, not just the algorithm. That's where the real opportunity is. It's really thinking about, can you zoom out and see the big picture? Let's keep this conversation going. Drop your thoughts in the comments. As Victoria said, she's available on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to her or to me if you have a thought, you have a comment, or you want to engage in truly changing and building a society that cares about responsible AI and ethical AI. If you have any questions about Wilda, again, reach out to either Victoria and me, and we'll be able to share with you what we're doing in Wilda. We have a big event coming November 7th, so check out our website, WLDA.tech, and Please join us November 7th for WLDA Summit and Gala. Nominations are open. I always say, please nominate yourself, nominate somebody in your community, your company, and in fact, nominate your enterprise. You can again go to WLDA.tech and nominate yourself, because it's all about cheering for each other. It's about cheering for you. Doing good work is important, but also recognition is important. So, Victoria, I hope you're nominating yourself, because I can't nominate you, and also nominating somebody who's well worth it. And everybody, see you next time on the AI Talk Show, Thursday, 12 p.m. Thank you so much.